few years ago, I was sitting on a train and was reading this article in the New York Times Magazine that made this provocative claim. The reason why women haven't achieved gender equality with men in the professional sphere is because they don't want to. They have different aspirations now than previous generations of women. They'd rather be at home with their kids than be CEO of a company, or than be a prestigious university professor, or than be the big shot lawyer. And this just didn't jive with my experience. It didn't jive with what I know about today's young women. We've seen record numbers of women going to law school and medical school, increasing shares of women in business programs. So I started to wonder, is there much evidence behind this claim? That today's women who are getting MBAs or getting law degrees or going for a PhD have decided to go home and raise kids instead of persevering in the professional realm. My specific research question was whether younger cohorts of women, so cohorts of women who were born in the 1950s and 1960s and 1970s, were working more or less than the cohorts of women that came before them. In order to capture the employment patterns of women who were born in the 1920s and 30s, when it was more unusual for women to be working, especially in fields like law and medicine, we need a really big sample. And so the obvious choice is the census. So I used data from the 1960, 1970, 1980, 1990, and 2000 census, as well as the American Community Survey data from 2005 and 2010. The measures I look at are three measures of employment. I look at the most basic measure, whether people are in the labor force or not, also known as labor force participation. But I think it's also important to consider how many hours people are working. How intense is their labor force participation? So I look at the percentage of women who are working full year, full time, as well as the percentage of women who are working more than 50 hours a week, what I'll call working long hours. I wanted to look at women in their prime working years. So women over age 25 once they'd completed most of their schooling, and women under age 55 before they retire. My analysis shows that women in the youngest cohorts, women in Generation X, who were born between 1966 and 1975, are working full-time, year-round, at much higher rates than any preceding cohort of women. They're also working long hours, that is, more than 50 hours a week, at higher rates than any preceding cohort of women. Now, there hasn't been as much change in labor force participation between Generation X and the baby boomers. We may have hit a plateau, but it's at a very high rate. And all the other employment measures tell us that women's employment and attachment to the labor force is increasing, not decreasing. In order to better understand what's going on with these numbers and the overall trends in women's employment, we want to think about how the population of women who are working has changed over time. Since one of the biggest factors affecting women's employment is whether they have kids and the age of their kids, I broke down the population into three groups: women with young children, women with older children, and women who don't have children. And so I thought about how the percentage of women who are doctors and lawyers and in these professional careers who fall into each of these three categories has changed across cohorts, as well as how the behavior, the employment rates of women in each of these categories is changing over time. When we look at the percentage of women who are not enrolled in school and not working, or the percentage who have opted out, we see a dramatic decrease across cohorts. So what we see is about 31% of women in the baby boom parents cohort, women who would have been your great-grandparents, were not working, compared with about 5% of Generation X, women who have school-age children today. Despite all these media claims, the science does not support an opt-out phenomenon story. We don't see that women are trading in paid work to stay at home and raise kids. Professional women are working more now than ever before, and there's no evidence that they're returning to more traditional patterns. And this suggests that the reason that gender equality has not yet been achieved may be other factors. It's not because women don't want these positions, or aren't working hard. So we have to look to other explanations.